The dust on the road shimmered in waves under the brutal Texas sun, and Trent Yates barely noticed the crumpled form lying in the scrub brush until his horse whinnied and sidestepped nervously. He pulled the reins tight, squinting against the glare, and his heart seized when he realized it was a woman lying there, still as death itself. He was off his horse in seconds, his boots hitting the hard-packed earth with purpose as he rushed to her side, already reaching for his canteen before he even knelt down. She was young, maybe 23 or 24, with dark hair matted against her pale face and lips cracked from dehydration. Her dress was threadbare, hanging loose on a frame that had clearly missed too many meals, and when he pressed his fingers gently to her neck, searching for a pulse, he found it beating weakly beneath skin that felt like parchment. "Miss," he said urgently, lifting her head carefully and bringing the canteen to her lips. "Miss, can you hear me?" The water touched her mouth and she stirred slightly, a small sound escaping her throat. Trent supported her head with one hand while he let a few drops fall onto her tongue, not wanting to give her too much too fast. Her eyelids fluttered, but did not open. He looked around the desolate stretch of land between Fort Worth and the smaller settlements to the west, seeing nothing but yellow grass and mesquite trees for miles. How long had she been out here? Where had she come from? He wet his bandana and dabbed at her face, wiping away the dust and trying to cool her burning skin. "Come on now," he murmured. "Stay with me." Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, the color a startling green even clouded with confusion and pain. She stared at him without comprehension, then suddenly jerked backward, fear flooding her features. "Easy," Trent said, holding up both hands. "I'm not going to hurt you. I found you on the road. You fainted." She tried to sit up and immediately swayed, her hand going to her head. Trent caught her shoulder to steady her. "Slow down. When did you last eat?" The question seemed to pierce through the fog in her mind. Her face crumpled and she looked away, shame washing over her features. "I do not remember," she whispered, her voice hoarse and cracked. "Days?" he pressed gently. "Weeks," she said, so quietly he almost missed it. "My husband, he stopped bringing food home weeks ago. He said I did not deserve it." The words hit Trent like a physical blow. He had seen cruelty in his 30 years, had witnessed violence and injustice across the frontier, but something about the defeated way she said it, the acceptance in her tone, made his blood run cold and then immediately hot with anger. "Where is your husband now?" "At our claim, 5 miles west of Fort Worth." She gestured vaguely in the direction she must have been walking. "I left this morning. I could not stay anymore. I thought I could make it to town, find work, anything. But I got so dizzy." "You nearly died," Trent said bluntly. "Another hour in this heat without water and you would have." She nodded as if this information was merely academic, as if her own death was something that had already happened in some fundamental way. Trent made a decision in that moment, one he knew might complicate his life, but that his conscience would not let him avoid. "What is your name?" "Victoria," she said. "Victoria Harper. I am Trent Yates. I work at the Crossed Rivers Ranch north of Fort Worth, and you are coming with me, Victoria Harper, because you need food and rest and medical attention." "I cannot," she said automatically. "My husband will." "Your husband left you to starve," Trent interrupted, his voice harder than he intended. He forced himself to soften it. "Whatever hold he has on you, whatever fear, we can address it later. Right now you need help and I'm offering it. Will you accept?" She stared at him for a long moment, and he saw something shift in her eyes. A tiny spark of something that might have been hope or might have been desperation. Either way, she nodded. Getting her onto his horse was a challenge. She had no strength left, and Trent ended up lifting her bodily, settling her in the saddle before swinging up behind her. She slumped against his chest immediately, unable to hold herself upright, and he wrapped one arm around her waist to keep her steady, while he guided the horse with the other hand. She was so light it frightened him. He could feel every rib through the fabric of her dress. The ride back to the Crossed Rivers Ranch took over an hour, and Victoria drifted in and out of consciousness the entire way. Trent talked to her when her head started to loll too far, asking her questions to keep her anchored. Where was she from originally? Missouri. How long had she been married? 2 years. Did she have family? Not anymore. Each answer was a small piece of a story he did not yet fully understand, but could already tell was tragic. When they finally reached the ranch, the sun was starting its descent toward the horizon, turning the sky shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful if Trent had not been so focused on the woman in his arms. He rode straight to the main house, calling out before he even dismounted, "Sarah! Sarah, I need help!" The door flew open, and Sarah Mitchell, the ranch foreman's wife, emerged with flour on her hands and alarm on her face. She was a capable woman in her 50s who had raised 6 children and doctored more injuries than the town physician. Her eyes widened when she saw Victoria. "Good Lord, what happened?" "Found her on the road. She has not eaten in weeks. Her husband—" He stopped, jaw tight. He was starving her. Sarah's face went hard as granite. "Bring her inside, quickly." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Sarah took charge immediately, getting Victoria into a bedroom and onto a bed, while sending her daughter to fetch the doctor anyway, just to be safe. She started with small amounts of broth, insisting Victoria take tiny sips, even though Trent could see the poor woman wanted to gulp it down. "Too much too fast will make you sicker," Sarah explained gently but firmly. Trent waited in the main room of the house, pacing, while Sarah and the doctor, once he arrived, tended to Victoria. He explained the situation to James Mitchell, the foreman, who listened with a deepening frown. "She is legally still married," James pointed out. "If her husband comes looking, he has rights." "Rights?" Trent said incredulously. "He tried to kill her through neglect. What kind of rights does that give him?" "I am not saying it is right," James said, holding up a hand. "I am saying it is the law. We need to be careful how we proceed." The doctor emerged before Trent could respond. Doctor. Carson was a thin man with spectacles and a perpetually worried expression that had deepened considerably. "She will live," he said without preamble. But it was close. Another day and we would be planning a funeral. She is severely malnourished, dehydrated, and exhausted. She needs rest, regular meals in small portions to start, and time to recover. Weeks, probably. "She can stay here," Sarah said, appearing behind the doctor. "We have the room, and she needs looking after." "Her husband," the doctor started. "Can go straight to hell," Sarah finished. "Any man who does that to his wife deserves worse than words can say." Despite the gravity of the situation, Trent felt a smile tug at his lips. Sarah Mitchell did not mince words. Over the next few days, Victoria slowly began to recover. Color returned to her face, though she remained thin and weak. Trent found himself stopping by the main house more often than his work required, checking on her progress. Sarah noticed, of course. Sarah noticed everything. "She is doing better," Sarah told him on the 3rd day, catching him loitering near the kitchen. "Kept down real food today, some eggs and bread." "That's good," Trent said. "She asks about you," Sarah added casually. "Wants to thank you properly." Trent felt his face warm. "She does not need to thank me. Anyone would have done the same." "You and I both know that is not true," Sarah said, fixing him with a knowing look. "But you can tell her yourself. She is awake and sitting up. Room at the end of the hall." He found Victoria sitting in a chair by the window, wearing one of Sarah's dresses that hung loose on her frame, but was clean and mended. She turned when he knocked softly on the door frame, and he was struck again by those green eyes, clearer now and holding something he had not seen before. Life. "Mr. Yates," she said, and her voice was stronger too. "Please come in." "Trent," he corrected, entering the room and taking a seat in the other chair. "No need for formalities." "Trent?" she repeated and smiled slightly. It transformed her face, giving him a glimpse of who she must have been before whatever darkness had entered her life. "Sarah says I have you to thank for saving my life. I just happened to be on the right road at the right time. You could have ridden past. Most people would have." She looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. "I do not even remember most of that day. I remember leaving our claim at dawn, walking, and then everything gets hazy. The next clear memory I have is waking up here with Sarah spooning broth into my mouth." "You were in bad shape," Trent said quietly. "How long had things been like that? With your husband?" Victoria was silent for a long moment. "It was not always that way," she finally said. "When we met in Missouri 3 years ago, Robert was charming, attentive. He promised me a life out west, land of our own, a fresh start. My parents had died the year before, cholera, and I had no siblings. I was alone, and he offered me something to hold on to." She paused, swallowing hard. We married quickly and headed to Texas. He filed a claim west of Fort Worth. But once we were on that land, isolated, everything changed. He started drinking, getting angry over small things, saying cruel things. "Did he hit you?" Trent asked, his voice tight. "Sometimes," she admitted. But the words hurt worse, somehow. He told me I was worthless, that I could not do anything right, that I was lucky he even kept me around. And then a few months ago, he started spending all our money at the saloon in town. We had less and less food. I tried to make it stretch, but he would eat what there was and leave me nothing. He said I did not need it, that I did not work hard enough to deserve it. Anger burned hot in Trent's chest. "That is not a man. That is a coward and a bully." Victoria looked up at him, surprised by the vehemence in his voice. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," Trent said. "I know you deserved better than what you got, and I know you were strong enough to walk away, even half dead from hunger. That takes courage." Her eyes filled with tears. "I was so scared, but I knew if I stayed, I would die. It was only a question of when." Without thinking, Trent reached out and took her hand. It was small and cold in his, and he folded both of his around it carefully. "You're safe now. We will figure out the rest." She did not pull away. Instead, her fingers curled around his, holding on like he was an anchor in a storm. The trouble came, inevitably, a week later. Trent was in the barn, checking on a mare who was due to foal soon, when he heard shouting from the direction of the main house. He ran, his hand instinctively going to the pistol at his hip, and found a man standing in the yard, clearly drunk even at midday, bellowing for his wife. "Victoria, get out here! I know they are hiding you!" Robert Harper was a large man gone to seed, his belly straining against his shirt and his face florid with drink and anger. He swayed on his feet, pointing an unsteady finger at James Mitchell, who stood between him and the house with his arms crossed. "You need to leave," James said firmly. "You are not welcome here. That is my wife in there. You got no right to keep her from me." Trent approached slowly, putting himself between Robert and the house as well. "She left you. She's not going back." Robert's bleary eyes focused on Trent. "Who the hell are you?" "The man who found her dying on the road because you were starving her," Trent said, his voice cold. "You want to talk about rights? You lost any rights you had when you stopped feeding your wife." "She is lying," Robert snarled. "She is lazy, always complaining. I worked hard to provide, and she wasted everything." "You are drunk right now," Trent pointed out. "I can smell the whiskey from here. How much of your money went to the saloon instead of food?" Robert's face went even redder. "You cannot keep her. The law says she is mine." "The law also says you have to provide for your wife," James interjected. "And there are witnesses now who will testify that you failed to do that. If you push this, it will not go well for you." For a moment, Trent thought Robert might charge at them, his hands clenched into fists and his whole body tensed, but then Sarah appeared on the porch, holding a rifle with the ease of long practice. "I suggest you get off this property," she said calmly, "before I forget my Christian charity." Robert looked between the four of them, seemed to calculate his odds, and spat on the ground. "Keep the worthless woman. I do not need her anyway." He turned and stumbled toward his horse, mounting with difficulty. "But do not think this is over. She is still my wife, and everyone will know what a whore she is, running off with other men." He rode off in a cloud of dust and muttered curses. Trent felt his jaw ache from clenching it so hard. "He will talk," James said quietly. "Spread rumors. Make things difficult." "Let him," Sarah said firmly. "Anyone who knows us will know the truth." Trent looked up at the house and saw Victoria standing at one of the windows, her face pale. He met her eyes and nodded once, trying to convey reassurance. She nodded back, but he could see she was shaken. That night, he found her sitting on the porch, wrapped in a shawl even though the evening was warm. She looked up when he approached, and he saw the worry written across her features. "He's going to make trouble," she said. "I should leave. Go somewhere else, somewhere far away where he cannot find me." "And go where?" Trent asked, settling onto the porch step beside her chair. "You have no money, you are still recovering, and you do not know anyone outside of Texas." "I could find work. I am stronger now." "Victoria," he said gently, "you do not have to run. We can handle Robert Harper." "You do not understand what he is like when he is really angry," she said, her voice small. "He will not just give up. He will." "He will what?" Trent interrupted. Come here and face James and me and half a dozen ranch hands who are all on your side. I saw him today. He is a bully, and bullies are cowards at heart. He made a lot of noise, but he left when he realized he was outnumbered. He was drunk. When he sobers up, he will think more clearly, plan more carefully. Then we will deal with it. Trent shifted so he could look at her more directly. I am not going to let him hurt you again, I promise. She studied his face in the dim light from the house windows. Why? She asked. Why do you care so much? You do not know me. You do not owe me anything. It was a fair question, and one Trent had been asking himself over the past week. He could say it was simple decency, that any good person would do the same. But that was not entirely true. There was something about Victoria that had gotten under his skin from that first moment on the road, her strength in the face of unimaginable cruelty, her quiet dignity even when she had every reason to give up. The way she smiled, rare as it was, like the sun breaking through clouds. I care because you deserve someone to care, he said finally, and because I want to, if that is reason enough. She looked away, but not before he saw her eyes glisten with fresh tears. No one has been kind to me in so long. I do not know how to accept it. You do not have to do anything, Trent said. Just let yourself heal. The rest will figure itself out. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, horses moving in the corrals, the distant yipping of coyotes, the chirp of crickets in the grass. Trent felt something settle in his chest, a rightness he had not experienced before. He had spent years drifting from ranch to ranch, never putting down roots, never connecting with anyone beyond surface friendship. But sitting here with Victoria, he felt like he might have found a reason to stay in one place. As the weeks passed, Victoria continued to gain strength and weight. Sarah put her to work helping around the house, insisting that being useful would aid her recovery more than lying in bed. Victoria threw herself into the tasks with gratitude, learning to cook Sarah's recipes, mending clothes, helping with the washing. She was quiet, still prone to starting at loud noises and flinching when people moved too quickly near her, but slowly she began to relax. Trent found excuses to be near her. He would take his meals at the main house instead of the bunkhouse. He would volunteer to chop wood for the kitchen or fix anything that needed repairing around the house. James teased him about it, but gently, and Sarah just watched with knowing eyes and said nothing. One afternoon, about a month after he had found her, Trent took Victoria riding. She had mentioned missing horses, that they had owned one on the claim, but Robert had sold it for drinking money. Trent saddled his gentlest mare and helped Victoria mount, then swung up on his own horse. They rode out across the ranch land, moving slowly, letting the horses walk rather than trot. Victoria sat the saddle naturally, her posture improving as they went, as if being on horseback reminded her body of something it had forgotten. I used to ride every day when I was young, she said, patting the mare's neck. My father had a small farm, and we had 3 horses. I loved them more than anything. What happened to the farm after your parents died? Trent asked. Had to sell it to pay debts. There was nothing left by the end. She sighed. That is why I agreed to marry Robert so quickly. I had nowhere else to go, no way to support myself. I thought I was lucky that someone wanted me. You were not lucky, Trent said. You were desperate, and he took advantage of that. That is not the same thing. She glanced at him, a small smile playing at her lips. You have a way of cutting straight to the truth. Spent too many years alone with my thoughts, he said lightly. No reason to dress things up fancy. They stopped at the top of a rise that overlooked the ranch and the lands beyond. In the distance, Fort Worth was visible, a smudge of buildings against the endless Texas sky. It was beautiful in its vastness, the kind of view that made a person feel small, but also part of something larger. Tell me about you, Victoria said. You know all my sad stories. What is yours? Trent shrugged. Not much to tell. Born in Kansas, parents died when I was young too. Cholera as well. Lived with an uncle who was not particularly interested in raising a kid, so I left when I was 16. Been working ranches ever since. No wife? No family of your own? Never found the right person, he said, and I moved around too much to put down roots. This is the longest I have stayed anywhere, actually. Been at Crossed Rivers for almost 2 years now. Do you like it here? I do, he said, and realized as he said it that it was true. James is fair, Sarah is like the mother I barely remember, and the work is good. For the first time in a long time, I've been thinking maybe it is time to stop drifting." Victoria turned to look at him, really look at him, and Trent felt his heart kick in his chest. The wind blew a strand of her dark hair across her face, and without thinking, he reached out and tucked it behind her ear. His fingers brushed her cheek and she drew in a sharp breath, but did not pull away. "Victoria," he said quietly. "Trent," she responded, just as quietly. He wanted to kiss her. The urge was so strong it was almost painful, but he held back, knowing it was too soon, that she was still healing in more ways than physical. Instead, he let his hand drop and turned back to the view. "We should head back before Sarah worries," he said. The ride back was quieter, but not uncomfortable. If anything, Trent felt like something had shifted between them, some unspoken understanding that grew stronger with each passing day. The next challenge came not from Robert, but from the law. A marshal showed up at the ranch a few days later, asking questions. He was a weathered man named Davies who had clearly seen everything and was not easily shocked. "I have had a complaint from Robert Harper," Davies said, sitting in James's office. "Trent and Victoria were there too, at the marshal's request. He says you are harboring his wife against her will." "That's a lie," Victoria said, her voice steady despite the nervousness Trent could see in her hands, clenched in her lap. "I left him willingly. He was starving me." Davies looked at her, taking in her still thin frame. "He says you ran off with another man." His eyes shifted to Trent. "I found her collapsed on the road, nearly dead," Trent said flatly. "I brought her here to be cared for, that is all." "Is it?" Davies asked, not unkindly. "Because Harper is claiming alienation of affection. Says you seduced his wife away from him." "I was already gone before I even met Trent," Victoria said, leaning forward. "I left that morning with nothing but the clothes on my back. I was trying to walk to Fort Worth to find work. I only made it a few miles before I fainted from hunger and heat. Trent happened to find me. He saved my life." "Can you prove Harper was not feeding you?" "I can," Dr. Carson said from the doorway. Everyone turned to see him standing there, black bag in hand. You sent word you wanted to speak with me, Marshal?" "I did. Come in, Doc." "Doctor." Carson entered and stood beside Victoria's chair. "When I examined Mrs. Harper 4 weeks ago, she was severely malnourished. In my professional opinion, she had not had adequate food for at least a month, possibly longer. She was also dehydrated and suffering from exhaustion. She would have died if she had not received help when she did." Davies pulled out a notebook and made some notes. "And you would testify to that?" "Absolutely. I have it all documented in my records." The marshal nodded slowly, then looked back at Victoria. "Mrs. Harper, do you want to return to your husband?" "No," she said firmly. "Never." "Are you aware that you are still legally married to him, that any relationship you have with another man would be considered adultery?" Victoria's face paled, but she nodded. "I am aware. What I want," she continued, her voice gaining strength, "is a divorce. I do not know if that is possible, but that is what I want." Davies leaned back in his chair. "It is possible, but difficult. You would need grounds, cruelty, neglect, abandonment." "She has grounds," Trent said. "He neglected her to the point of attempted murder through starvation. If that is not cruelty, I do not know what is." "You would need to prove it in court," Davies said. "It would be his word against yours." "She has Dr. Carson's testimony," James pointed out. "She has our testimony about the condition she was in when Trent brought her here. She has Robert's own words from when he showed up here drunk and shouting, heard by multiple witnesses." Davies studied them all for a long moment. Then he sighed. "Look, I'm going to be straight with you folks. Robert Harper is a known drunk and a troublemaker. I have had to throw him in a cell more than once for brawling. I do not like the man, but the law is the law, and right now he is her legal husband." "So what do we do?" Victoria asked, her voice small. "You file for divorce. It will take time and it will not be pleasant. Harper will fight it, probably. But with the evidence you have, I think you stand a good chance. In the meantime," he looked at Trent pointedly, "you keep things proper. No ammunition for him to use against you." Trent nodded. Even his frustration burned in his gut. He understood what Davies was saying. He and Victoria needed to maintain a public propriety, no matter what their private feelings might be. After the marshal left, Victoria sank into her chair, looking exhausted. This is never going to end, is it? He is never going to let me go. He will, Trent said firmly. We will make sure of it. The process of filing for divorce was every bit as difficult as Marshal Davies had warned. Victoria had to travel to the county seat to file the papers, and Trent accompanied her, along with Sarah, for propriety's sake. The lawyer they consulted was a sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Elizabeth Cornwall, one of the few female lawyers in Texas and known for taking on difficult cases. Your case is strong, Mrs. Cornwall said after hearing the full story, but I will not lie to you. Judges do not like dissolving marriages. You will face questions about your own conduct, your faithfulness, your efforts to make the marriage work. It will be invasive and uncomfortable. I do not care, Victoria said. I want to be free of him. Then we will fight, Mrs. Cornwall said with a grim smile. The hearing was set for 2 months away. In the meantime, life at the ranch settled into a new normal. Victoria continued to help Sarah, and she and Trent continued to grow closer, though they were careful to maintain appearances. They went on rides together, but always with someone else along. They talked for hours, but always in public spaces. It was torture of a sort, Trent thought, being so close to her but unable to touch her the way he wanted, unable to tell her the full depth of what he felt. But Victoria was worth waiting for. One evening, as summer deepened into its full heat, Trent found Victoria sitting outside the bunkhouse, where he had been repairing a saddle. The other hands were in town, and the ranch was quiet. Sarah said I might find you here, she said, settling onto a bench near where he worked. Needed to fix this before tomorrow, he said, indicating the saddle. Stitching came loose. They sat in companionable silence for a while, Trent working while Victoria watched. The sun set in brilliant shades of red and gold, painting the sky like it was on fire. Can I tell you something? Victoria asked suddenly. Always. I am scared, she admitted, of the hearing, of what might happen. What if the judge does not believe me? What if I have to go back to Robert? Trent set down his tools and moved to sit beside her. You are not going back to him. I promise you that. You cannot promise that. You do not control the courts. Then I promise that whatever happens, you will not face it alone. If the worst happens and somehow the judge rules against you, then we will figure out another way. We will go somewhere else, somewhere he cannot find you. That would be running away. That would be surviving, Trent corrected. But it will not come to that. Your case is strong, Victoria. The truth is on your side. She turned to face him, and in the fading light, her eyes were luminous. Why are you so good to me? I think you know why, he said quietly. I want to hear you say it. Trent took a breath. They were alone, and the words had been building in him for weeks. Because I'm in love with you. I have been since the day I found you, I think. Maybe even since that first moment when you opened your eyes and looked at me. I know it is too soon. I know you are still married and still healing. But I cannot help how I feel. Victoria's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. It is not too soon, she whispered. I feel it too. I have been so afraid to admit it, even to myself, because everything is so complicated and uncertain. But I love you, Trent. You saved my life in every way a person can be saved. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hand. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. I want to kiss you, he said, but I do not want to cause you trouble. Then we will be careful, she said, opening her eyes. But I need this. I need to know that what I feel is real, that you are real. He kissed her gently, carefully, aware that this was precious and fragile. Her lips were soft under his, and she tasted of the honey Sarah had put in her tea. When they pulled apart, both were breathing harder, and Trent rested his forehead against hers. We will get through this, he said. Together. Together, she echoed. The hearing was held on a blazing hot day in August of 1878. The courtroom was stifling despite the open windows, and Victoria sat at the front with Mrs. Cornwall, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Trent sat in the gallery with James and Sarah, forbidden from sitting with Victoria, but determined to be there for support. Robert Harper sat on the other side with his own lawyer, a sleazy-looking man named Horton, who was known for defending unsavory characters. Robert had cleaned himself up for the occasion, wearing a suit and looking almost respectable. It made Trent's skin crawl. The judge was an older man named Bennett, known for being fair but strict. He listened as Mrs. Cornwall laid out the case, presenting Dr. Carson's testimony and medical records, statements from Trent and the Mitchells, and Victoria's own account of the neglect and cruelty she had endured. Then it was Horton's turn. He painted Victoria as a disobedient wife, a woman who refused to do her duties and then complained when her husband disciplined her appropriately. He insinuated that she had been unfaithful, that she had run to another man's arms with indecent haste. Victoria sat through it all with her head held high, though Trent could see the trembling in her hands. When she was called to testify, she spoke clearly and calmly, answering every invasive question with dignity. "Did you love your husband?" Horton asked at one point. "I thought I did at first," Victoria said, "but I came to realize that what I felt was not love, but fear and dependence. Love does not starve you. Love does not tell you that you are worthless. And yet you claim to love Mr. Yates after knowing him for mere months?" "I claim nothing," Victoria said evenly. "But yes, I have feelings for Mr. Yates. He showed me what real kindness looks like. He saved my life and asked nothing in return. That is more than my husband ever did in 2 years of marriage." When Robert was called to testify, he presented himself as the wronged party, a hard-working man whose wife had betrayed him. But under cross-examination by Mrs. Cornwall, his story fell apart. She questioned him about his drinking, his spending, his whereabouts during the times he claimed to be working to provide for his wife. She asked him point-blank why his wife had been found nearly dead from starvation if he was such a devoted husband. "She was always complaining," Robert said, his face reddening. "Nothing was ever good enough for her. If she went hungry, it was because she was too lazy to prepare the food I brought home." "And what food was that?" Mrs. Cornwall pressed. "According to the statements from merchants in Fort Worth, you had not purchased supplies for your household in over 2 months before your wife left. Where was this food you claim to have provided?" Robert had no good answer. The hearing lasted all day. By the time the judge called for a recess to consider his decision, Trent felt wrung out from the tension. He waited outside with Victoria, Sarah, and James while Mrs. Cornwall went over her notes. "You did well in there," Trent told Victoria quietly. "You were strong." "I do not feel strong," she admitted. "I feel sick." "It will be over soon," Sarah said, rubbing Victoria's back, "one way or another." When they were called back in, Judge Bennett looked stern as he surveyed the courtroom. "This has been a difficult case," he began. "Marriage is a sacred institution, not to be dissolved lightly. However, it is also clear that marriage carries responsibilities on both sides. A husband must provide for and protect his wife. Mrs. Harper has presented compelling evidence that her husband failed in these fundamental duties." Trent felt his heart pounding. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "Mr. Harper's conduct during this hearing, as well as his documented behavior in the community, does not inspire confidence in his character or his commitment to the marriage. Therefore, I am granting Mrs. Harper's petition for divorce on the grounds of cruelty and neglect. This marriage is hereby dissolved." The words seemed to hang in the air for a moment, and then Victoria made a small sound, half sob and half laugh. Mrs. Cornwall was patting her shoulder, smiling. Trent wanted to rush to her to pull her into his arms, but he restrained himself, knowing there were still appearances to maintain. Robert stood up, his face dark with rage. "This is not over," he shouted. "You cannot do this." "Mr. Harper, I can and I have," Judge Bennett said coldly. "You will pay court costs and you will leave Mrs. Harper alone, or I will hold you in contempt. Do you understand?" Robert glared, but finally nodded and stormed out of the courtroom. Trent watched him go, every muscle tense, ready to intervene if he tried to approach Victoria. But Robert left without further incident, and Trent finally allowed himself to breathe. Outside the courthouse, Victoria turned to Trent with tears streaming down her face. "I am free," she said, her voice full of wonder. "I am actually free." "You are," he said, and this time he did pull her into his arms, not caring who saw. She clung to him, shaking with relief and emotion. Sarah and James and Mrs. Cornwall all stood by smiling, giving them this moment. "What happens now?" Victoria asked when she finally pulled back, wiping at her eyes. "Now," Trent said, taking her hands in his. You decide what you want your life to look like. No one else gets to tell you anymore. She looked up at him, and her smile was radiant. I want it to look like this, like you and me together, if you will have me. If I will have you? He repeated incredulously. Victoria, I have been yours since the day I found you. The question is whether you want to tie yourself to a cowboy with nothing to his name but a horse and a saddle. I want exactly that, she said firmly. I do not need money or land or anything fancy. I just need you. He kissed her then, properly, deeply, pouring all his love and relief and joy into it. When they broke apart, Sarah was crying happy tears and James was grinning. I suppose this means you will not be staying in the bunkhouse anymore, James said. I suppose I will need to build a cabin, Trent agreed, not taking his eyes off Victoria. If the ranch has room for one more permanent resident. I think we can manage that, James said warmly. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity and happiness. Trent, with the help of the other ranch hands, built a small but sturdy cabin on a piece of land James designated for them. It had 2 rooms and a porch with a view of the hills to the west. Victoria helped where she could, learning construction skills alongside cooking and riding and everything else she had never had the chance to learn in her restricted life with Robert. They were married in October, in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with friends and neighbors in attendance. Victoria wore a dress Sarah had helped her make, pale blue with white lace, and carried wildflowers Trent had picked that morning. She had never looked more beautiful, and when she walked toward him, Trent felt his throat close with emotion. The vows they spoke were traditional, but they held new meaning. To have and to hold, for better or worse, in sickness and health. Trent meant every word with his whole heart, and he knew Victoria did too. Their wedding night was tender and unhurried, a world away from the violence and cruelty Victoria had known before. Trent was patient, letting her set the pace, focusing on her comfort and pleasure. When she cried afterward, he held her close and let her release all the old pain, making room for new joy. I never knew it could be like this, she whispered against his chest, gentle and good. It will always be like this, he promised. I will spend my life making sure you feel loved and cherished. They settled into married life with ease, finding rhythms and routines that suited them both. Victoria took over the cabin, making it a home with curtains and rugs and small touches that transformed bare walls into a warm space. Trent continued his work on the ranch, but now he came home to a wife who greeted him with a smile and a kiss, to meals shared by their own hearth, to a bed that held only love and comfort. Robert Harper, to everyone's relief, seemed to have disappeared. Rumors placed him farther west or maybe south into Mexico. Either way, he did not return to Fort Worth, and as the months passed, the shadow of his presence faded from Victoria's eyes. In the spring of 1879, Victoria told Trent she was pregnant. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with delight, before carefully setting her down and apologizing for being too rough. She laughed and kissed him, her happiness matching his own. "Are you scared?" he asked that night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on her still flat belly. "A little," she admitted, "but mostly I'm excited. This baby will be born into love, into a real home. That's all I ever wanted." "Boy or girl does not matter to me," Trent said, "as long as both of you are healthy." "Sarah says it will be a boy," Victoria said with a smile. She claims she can always tell. "Sarah has been right about everything else so far," Trent agreed. Sarah was, in fact, right. Victoria gave birth to a healthy baby boy in late October, almost exactly a year after their wedding. The labor was long and difficult, and Trent paced the cabin like a caged animal, while Sarah and the doctor attended to Victoria. But when he finally heard the cry of his son and was allowed back into the bedroom, all the fear melted away. Victoria looked exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Trent approached slowly, reverently, and looked down at the red-faced, squalling infant. He had a shock of dark hair, and his eyes, when they briefly opened, were a murky blue that the doctor said would probably change color in time. "He is perfect," Trent breathed. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names, but never settled on one. Now, looking at his son, Trent knew. "Thomas," he said, "after my father." Victoria smiled. Thomas Yates. It suits him. Trent carefully took the baby from Victoria, supporting the tiny head like Sarah had shown him, and felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. This was his son, his family, the life he had never dared dream of having. "I love you," he told Victoria, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for this, for him, for everything." "I love you too," she said. "You gave me my life back, Trent. This is just the beginning of what we will build together." And it was. Over the next several years, their family grew. 2 years after Thomas, they had a daughter they named Lily, who had her mother's green eyes and her father's stubborn streak. 3 years after that, another son, James, named after the foreman who had become like a father to both of them. The cabin was expanded to accommodate their growing family, and Trent took on more responsibility at the ranch, eventually becoming James Mitchell's assistant foreman. Victoria's health, which had been so precarious when they first met, flourished with good food and happiness. She became known in the community for her kindness and her work with other women who found themselves in difficult situations, always ready to offer help or refuge. Robert Harper's name became a distant memory, occasionally mentioned as a cautionary tale, but holding no power over their lives anymore. They had built something real and lasting, something that belonged only to them. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Trent took Victoria back to the spot where he had first found her. It was a pilgrimage they made once a year, a reminder of where they had started and how far they had come. The road was the same, dusty and endless under the Texas sun, but everything else had changed. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I had not come along that day?" Trent asked as they stood together, looking out over the familiar landscape. "I try not to," Victoria said honestly, "but sometimes I do. I would have died there, I think. Or maybe I would have made it to Fort Worth and found some other life, but it would not have been this life. It would not have been you." "I was meant to find you," Trent said with certainty. "Everything in my life led to that moment. Every ranch I worked, every road I traveled, it was all leading me to you." She leaned into him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "We were both lost," she said, "and somehow we found each other. That is the miracle of it." They stayed there for a while, marking the past while standing firmly in the present. When they finally returned to their cabin and their children, who were being watched by Sarah for the afternoon, they were greeted with chaos and laughter, sticky faces, and wild stories about the mischief they had gotten into. That night, after the children were finally asleep, Trent and Victoria sat on their porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. She held his hand, her thumb tracing circles on his palm. "I am happy," she said simply. "After everything, after all the darkness, I am truly happy. And it is because of you." "It is because of us," Trent corrected, "because you were brave enough to leave, because you chose to live. I just got lucky enough to be there when you needed someone." "You are more than just someone," Victoria said, turning to look at him. "You are everything. My best friend, my partner, the father of my children, the love of my life. I thank God every day for that dusty road and the heat that made me faint, because it brought me to you." Trent pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I thank God for it too. And I promise you, Victoria, for the rest of our lives, I will never stop being grateful. I will never stop loving you." "I know," she said softly. "I know." And in the quiet of that Texas night, surrounded by the land they had made their own and the family they had built together, they sat in peaceful contentment. The past was behind them, its pain and trauma transformed into strength and wisdom. The future stretched ahead, full of promise and possibility. But the present, this moment, was enough. Years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their children. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved working with the horses. Lily was bright and mischievous, always getting into trouble and talking her way back out of it. Young James was the peacemaker, gentle and kind, always trying to keep his siblings from fighting. Trent and Victoria watched them grow with pride and joy, marveling at the people they were becoming. They had difficult conversations with their children as they got older, age-appropriate discussions about Victoria's past and the importance of kindness and respect. They wanted their children to understand that people could overcome terrible circumstances, that strength came in many forms, and that love was the greatest power of all. The ranch continued to thrive, and the Yates family became an integral part of its success. When James Mitchell finally retired at the age of 68, he named Trent as his successor. Sarah continued to be a beloved presence in their lives, a grandmother in all but blood to their children. On a warm summer evening in 1895, Trent and Victoria celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary. Their children, now young adults, had organized a party at the ranch, inviting friends and neighbors from across the county. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, stories told and memories shared. At one point, Thomas stood up and offered a toast. He was 24 now, a grown man who worked alongside his father, and his voice carried the authority of someone who had found his place in the world. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who taught me that love is not just a feeling, but a choice you make every day. That strength is not about never falling down, but about getting back up. That family is the greatest treasure we can have. Thank you for building a life for us. Thank you for loving each other so well." There were tears and cheers, and Trent felt his throat tighten with emotion. He looked at Victoria across the crowd and found her already looking at him, her eyes shining. They moved toward each other instinctively, meeting in the middle of the celebration. 25 years, she said, shaking her head in wonder. "It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once." "Would you do it again?" he asked, pulling her into his arms for a slow dance as the music played. "If you could go back, knowing everything that would happen, would you make the same choices?" "Every single one," she said without hesitation. "The pain, the fear, the struggle. All of it was worth it to end up here, with you, with our family. I would walk that dusty road again. I would faint in the heat again, if I knew you would be there to catch me." "Always," he promised, "in this life and whatever comes after. I will always be there to catch you." They danced as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, surrounded by the love they had built and the community they had fostered. Their children watched with knowing smiles, understanding that this was what they were meant to aspire to. This kind of partnership, this depth of love. As the party wound down and guests began to depart, Trent and Victoria slipped away to their cabin. It had been expanded and improved over the years, but the bones of it remained the same. The porch where they had spent countless evenings talking, the bedroom where their children had been conceived, and where they had shared their deepest intimacies. The kitchen, where Victoria had learned to cook and where the family had shared thousands of meals. They stood in the main room, looking at the photographs on the walls. Their wedding day, young and hopeful. The children as babies, toddlers, adolescents, family gatherings and holidays, a visual history of their life together. "I never imagined this," Victoria said quietly. "When I was with Robert, slowly dying, I could not imagine a future at all. And now, look at what we have created. It is more than I ever dreamed possible." "You created this as much as I did," Trent said. "Maybe more. You had to be so much stronger than I ever was. You had to rebuild yourself from nothing." "Not nothing," she corrected. "I had you. From the very start, I had you believing in me, caring for me, showing me what I deserved. That is not nothing. That is everything." He held her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her, feeling the way her body fit perfectly against his after all these years. "I love you," he said simply. "I have never stopped, not for a single moment. You are my heart, Victoria." "And you are mine," she whispered back. The years continued their steady march forward. Their children married and had children of their own, making Trent and Victoria grandparents. Thomas married a strong-willed woman named Catherine, and they had 3 children. Lily married a school teacher, and they moved to Austin, where she became involved in women's rights advocacy, inspired by her mother's story. James took over the ranch when Trent finally retired, proving to be as capable and fair as his father. Trent and Victoria grew old together with grace and dignity. Their hair turned gray, their movements slowed, but their love remained constant. They still took walks together when the weather was fine, still sat on their porch in the evenings, still held hands like young lovers. On a spring morning in 1912, Victoria did not wake up. She had been ill for several weeks with a respiratory infection that would not clear, and in the night, her heart had simply stopped. Trent woke to find her cold beside him, peaceful in death, and his grief was a physical pain that took his breath away. The funeral was attended by what seemed like the entire county. Victoria had touched so many lives, helped so many people, that there were not enough seats in the church. People spoke of her kindness, her strength, her generosity. They told stories of how she had helped women escape bad situations, how she had advocated for better laws, how she had been a friend to anyone in need. Trent listened to it all with quiet pride and devastating sadness. He was 64 years old, and he did not know how to exist in a world without her. But he did, because she would have wanted him to. He continued to be involved with the ranch. Though James handled the day-to-day operations, he spent time with his children and grandchildren, passing on stories and wisdom. He made sure Victoria's legacy was remembered and honored. 5 years after Victoria's death, on a warm October day that reminded him of their wedding day all those years ago, Trent went to sleep in the afternoon for a nap and did not wake up. The doctor said it was his heart, worn out from years of work and grief. But Trent's children knew better. He had died of a broken heart, unable to go on without the woman who had been his other half. They buried him next to Victoria, on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. The headstone was simple, listing their names and dates, but below that, the words Trent had insisted on years before. Two lost souls who found each other. Their children and grandchildren continued to thrive, carrying forward the lessons of love and resilience that Trent and Victoria had taught them. The ranch remained in the family for generations, a testament to what two people could build when they chose love over fear, hope over despair. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew just right across the Texas hills, people swore they could see two figures walking hand in hand, still together, even in death, still choosing each other every single day. A cowboy who had saved a dying woman on a dusty road, and the woman who had saved him right back, giving him a purpose and a family and a love that lasted beyond time itself. Their story became legend in Fort Worth and the surrounding areas. It was told to young couples starting their own journeys, a reminder that true love exists and that it is worth fighting for. It was told to women in difficult situations, proof that escape is possible and that happiness can be found again. It was told to anyone who needed hope, evidence that even the darkest circumstances can lead to light. The cabin where they had raised their family stood for many years, maintained by their descendants as a kind of shrine to what they had built. The porch where they had spent countless evenings was preserved, the view to the western hills unchanged. Visitors would come and stand there, looking out at the same vista Trent and Victoria had loved, and feel the power of their story in the very boards beneath their feet. The specific place on the road where Trent had found Victoria was marked eventually with a simple stone monument, not because they had asked for it, but because their grandchildren felt it needed to be remembered. The place where two lives had intersected and changed forever. The place where love had first taken root in the most unlikely circumstances. Thomas's grandson, named Trent after the grandfather he had never met, would bring his own children to that spot and tell them the story. How their great-great-grandfather had been riding along this very road one blistering summer day in 1878 and had found a woman nearly dead from starvation and neglect. How he had saved her, cared for her, fallen in love with her. How she had survived and thrived and become one of the most respected women in the county. How they had built a life together that lasted nearly 35 years and produced a family that continued to grow and flourish. The point, young Trent would tell his children as they stood by the monument, is that even when things seem darkest, even when you think there is no hope left, life can surprise you. Love can find you. You just have to hold on long enough for it to arrive. And the children would listen, wide-eyed, taking in the story of their ancestors. They would look out at the Texas landscape, harsh and beautiful in equal measure, and understand that they came from strong stock, that they carried in their blood the resilience of a woman who had walked away from death and the courage of a man who had chosen to care when he could have ridden past. The story of Trent and Victoria Yates became part of the fabric of their family history. Told and retold, each generation adding their own understanding and appreciation. It was a love story, yes, but it was also a survival story, a story about the power of kindness, the importance of standing up for what is right, the strength it takes to start over. It was about the fact that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead us to the best if we are brave enough to keep moving forward. In the town of Fort Worth itself, which grew from a frontier settlement into a thriving city, the story was remembered too. There was a women's shelter that bore Victoria's name, founded by Lily and her daughter in the early 20th century, and still operating decades later. It provided refuge for women escaping abusive situations, offering them food, shelter, medical care, and legal assistance. Above the door was a quote attributed to Victoria herself: "You deserve to be fed, to be safe, to be loved. Never let anyone tell you different." The shelter helped thousands of women over the years, many of whom went on to build new lives for themselves, finding happiness and success they had never imagined possible. They were Victoria's legacy, proof that one woman's courage could ripple out across generations, helping people she would never meet, but whose struggles she understood intimately. And through it all, through the decades and the changes, through the passage from the wild frontier days of the 1870s to the modern world beyond, the core truth of Trent and Victoria's story remained constant: that love, real love, has the power to heal and transform. That kindness matters, that it is never too late to start over, that two people who choose each other, who commit to building something beautiful together, can create a legacy that outlasts their own lives. On the hill where they were buried, the grass grew green and thick, watered by Texas rains and warmed by Texas sun. Wildflowers bloomed there every spring, the same kind Victoria had carried at her wedding. And if you stood there quietly on the right kind of evening, when the light was golden and the air was still, you could almost feel their presence, not ghostly or frightening, but comforting. A sense of deep peace and abiding love that had seeped into the very earth itself. Their great-great-grandchildren, living in a world Victoria and Trent could never have imagined, with automobiles and electricity and all the trappings of modern life, still visited that hill, still told the story, still found inspiration in the simple fact that a cowboy had stopped to help a dying woman, and in doing so had found the love of his life. Because in the end, that was what mattered. Not the hardship or the pain or the struggles they had faced, not the legal battles or the poverty or the cruelty of the past. What mattered was that they had found each other, that they had chosen love, that they had built a life together filled with joy and children and purpose, that they had been happy, truly and deeply happy for 35 years. And that was everything. The story of the cowboy who found her faint from lack of food, whose husband had given her nothing for weeks, and who became the love of his life, was complete. It had a beginning on a dusty road under the brutal Texas sun. It had a middle filled with challenges overcome and love deepened. And it had an ending on a hill overlooking the land they had made their own, where they rested together for eternity, still hand in hand, still choosing each other, still proving that even in the hardest places, in the darkest times, love could not only survive but thrive. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried that truth forward into their own lives, making their own choices, building their own families, creating their own legacies. But they did so with the foundation Trent and Victoria had laid, with the example they had set, with the understanding that love, true love, was worth fighting for, worth believing in, worth building a life around. And so, the story lived on, told around dinner tables and written in family histories, preserved in photographs and monuments and memories. The story of two lost souls who found each other in the unlikeliest of circumstances and built something beautiful and lasting. The story of a love that conquered cruelty and neglect and fear, that grew stronger with each passing year, that lasted beyond death itself. It was a story of the Wild West, yes, with all the hardship and danger that entailed. But more than that, it was a story of the human heart and its capacity for resilience, for forgiveness, for hope, for love. It was a story that reminded everyone who heard it that no matter how dark things might seem, there is always the possibility of light. Always the chance for love to find you, if you are brave enough to stay alive long enough to meet it. And in a world that often seemed harsh and unforgiving, that was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth holding on to. Because if Victoria could survive and thrive, if Trent could choose kindness when he could have ridden past, if two broken people could come together and create something whole and beautiful and lasting, then anything was possible. That was the legacy of Trent and Victoria Yates, not just the ranch or the family or the shelter that bore her name, but the simple, powerful truth that love wins, that kindness matters, that it is never too late to start over, to choose differently, to build a better life. And on that hill in Texas, under the wide sky they had both loved, surrounded by the land they had worked and the family they had created, they rested in peace, their story complete, their love eternal, their legacy secure in the hearts and lives of everyone they had touched. The end of their mortal journey, but not the end of their influence, not the end of their love. That went on and on and on, rippling out across time and space, touching lives they never knew, inspiring people they never met, proving again and again that one act of kindness on a dusty road could change everything. That was the story. That was the truth. That was the legacy of the cowboy and the woman he found faint from lack of food, whose husband had given her nothing for weeks. A legacy of love, of survival, of hope renewed, of second chances taken and not wasted. A legacy that would endure as long as there were people to tell the story and hearts to be moved by it. And so, on a hill in Fort Worth, Texas, under the endless sky, two souls rested together, their journey complete, their love story told, their happily ever after, earned through struggle and choice, and the simple, profound decision to love each other every single day. Forever.